And then we start talking about right to exist. Like, does South Sudan have a right to exist? It doesn't already. It already doesn't exist. It's not a real country. How could it have a right to exist when it can't exist on its own? If your country cannot exist on its own, then it has no right to exist. I don't know how else to put it. All right, let's see. So on Friday, Tucker Carlson interviewed, I think it was Friday, maybe it was Thursday. Friday, I think. Tucker Carlson interviewed Mike Huckabee, who is, of course, now the ambassador to Israel. And I thought it was an interesting conversation. There's one clip that I want to play and talk about. It kind of represents a theme, the theme of the conversation, I would say. But let's watch it. Here it is.
You've spent a lot of time thinking about the right of the Jewish people to their homeland. Do the Irish have the same right to a homeland?
As long as they can defend it. And as long as they,
as long as they can defend it.
But Tucker, here's the point.
Wait a second.
I'm telling you.
Wait, hold on. Now you just flipped category. You're the minister here.
Yeah, and I'm telling you.
As long as they can defend it. And if they can't defend it, they lose the right.
Allowing me to tell you that I think that what is very, very special here is that there is a biblical as well as an ethnic and a historical. So you can take any one, but if you add them all together, biblical, historical, and ethnic, you have a very strong case that the Jewish people are living in a land that is indigenous to them, that has been their historic homeland for 3,800 years.
You can repeat it as
And you can also look in the archaeology. The stones cry out.
Okay.
Have you been to the city of David, for example?
I have.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you know then that...
And I love it.
It's an amazing place.
Agree.
It may be the greatest archaeological discovery in all of history because
great.
It's stunning. And they still continue to find things that date the Jewish people to this land archaeologically for 3,800 years.
We can date the British people to their land much longer, thousands of years longer. Stonehenge is 3,000 years older than any building built by the descendants of Abram in this country. And so it's fine. I'm not trying to invalidate anyone's right. I'm just wanting you to affirm that right, but it makes you uncomfortable and you won't. And I don't know why.
Because I've never honestly sat down and asked myself, are the lines around the
It's an island, so we know what the lines are.
I'm saying, but are those lines, are those rooted in something other than the historical connection? Well, great, then they should have it. But that's
they have a right to have it. But then you said if they can defend it, and if they can't defend it, they lose the right.
But I didn't say it was exclusive one or the other. I think you're really going off the trail.
I just want to know if these principles apply universally or if they only apply to the people of Israel.
This is a conversation, a debate about Israel's right to exist, and much of the interview centered around that question. That clip may not have even been the best representative sample of that debate, but it certainly is related to it. Much of the conversation can circle around this question: does Israel have a right to exist? And I just want to say that from my perspective, the whole question, the whole debate, really is based on a false premise. And my answer to this is one that doesn't really make anybody happy because I don't think that Israel has the right to exist. I don't think that any country has the right to exist. I don't think there's any country that we can look at and say they have a right to exist. And let me explain what I mean by that. So first, I think you have to define your terms. Not to be pedantic, but in this case, it's not. What do we mean by right? We really gotta. This is a word that comes up a lot in our debates about any topic. Any topic, it always comes back to someone making a rights claim. I have a right to this. I have a right to that. Well, what do you mean by that? What does that mean? And I think very often the people that are talking about it using the term "I have a right to it," they really have no. If you were to ask them, well, what do you mean you have a right to it? Like, where do you get that right? Where does that come from? They wouldn't be able to tell you. So to me, I think the word right means an entitlement. That's what a right is. You are entitled to something. I have a right to something means I am entitled to it. And if we don't mean, when we say right, if we don't mean entitled, then I don't know what we mean. So if you object to my definition of right, then you got to tell me what yours is, because as far as I can tell, that's what we mean. When someone talks about right, when someone says they have a right to something, they're saying they are entitled to it. So for example, and you can be entitled to things like if you have a contract with your employer, let's say, You have a right to the compensation outlined in your contract. You have a right to it. You are entitled to it. Those words mean the same thing. You can rightfully say, I'm entitled to that. I have a right to that. And it's not just about contracts. My kids have a right to be cared for by me, fed, protected. They are entitled to that. They have a right to it. They are entitled to it, both legally and morally and spiritually and in every other sense. We have rights outlined in the Bill of Rights. We're entitled to that. Protection against unreasonable search and seizures, the ability to own firearms, and so on. We are entitled to that as Americans. Well, and the word entitled gets a bad rap because people are constantly claiming they're entitled to things that they aren't actually entitled to. We spend billions of dollars on entitlements in this country, and not a single cent of entitlement spending actually goes to people who are entitled to what they're getting. Nobody is entitled to receive anything through our entitlement programs, even though we call it that. We shouldn't call it that. So that's the confusion. But people can be entitled to certain things, and those are their actual, real rights. Okay, so then what does it mean for a country to be entitled to exist? Well, I don't know what that means. I truly don't. Entitled based on what? The only way that any country has ever come into existence, ever, is through force. There are no exceptions to this rule on the planet, and there never have been, and there never will be. No country exists unless it has forced its own existence violently. And no country continues to exist unless it continues to insist on its own existence through force, through violence. The very idea that any country, any nation, that the political entity of a nation is entitled to exist is incoherent. It makes no sense. I make this point about the Native Americans all the time. Now, you often hear people who are on the pro-Israel side, they'll say that, well, Israel's the only country where that has to justify its own existence. Right? It's the only country where people has to constantly justify its own existence. Well, every time I hear that, I think, well, have you ever heard of America? What are you talking about? We're built on stolen land. We hear that all the time. We heard it at the Grammys. I mean, we hear it all the time. We have policies and laws that have been based on that idea in some places. We have an entire major political party that professes that, and at least tries to advance policies and everything based on that idea. But my whole response to that is that the idea that the natives in the New World were entitled to remain permanent owners over this entire hemisphere is ridiculous. They only claimed ownership in the first place through an act of sheer force, through violence, and what does that mean? It means that they killed and conquered in order to claim this in the first place. And does that mean that okay, then no one is allowed to ever conquer them? So they conquer it, and then they could say, well, we're entitled to have this forever. Yeah, we used violence to take it, but no one's allowed to use violence to take it from us. That would be infringing on our rights. What? How does that make any sense? That's not the way it works. They claimed ownership through force. They had to defend it through force. They tried, they couldn't, and history played out the way that it was inevitably going to play out. If you as a nation are able to support and defend yourself, then you can exist. If you as a nation cannot support or defend yourself, then you have no right to exist. You're not even a real country. And I apply this logic to every country on earth. And when people say, well, would you apply it to America? Absolutely. If the United States ever got to a point where it could not exist without the protection and patronage of some other nation, then the United States would have no right to exist at that point. In fact, the United States would already not exist. Okay, if we were in some kind of dystopian future where China basically is it owns the United States and we exist at their pleasure, then we don't exist anymore. We already don't exist. And we're already a vassal of this other nation. Our existence would be a phantom, a ruse, a charade. And the problem now is that we have a world full of like 180 countries. And many of those countries just aren't real. They're not real countries. They're fake countries. Okay, I understand that this view is not popular, but I can't see it any other way. Like if you were to go back to the year, say, 1700, there were not nearly as many countries on Earth. Right? It was the same amount of land, obviously, but there weren't as many countries because you had a few empires that owned basically the whole globe. You had the Spanish Empire, the Portuguese, British, French, Ottoman, Chinese, and so on. You go back another 1,000 years, you had different empires controlling most of the globe. And where you didn't have empires, you had small tribal societies, very small, often nomadic, that were constantly in a state of war with each other. That was especially the case in much of North America, for example. And this, to me, was a much more honest, kind of clear way of dividing things up. The powerful empires used their power to expand and claim ownership over land. And now we have this distinctly modern situation, which most people don't appreciate how modern and unusual it really is. But we've got 180 countries, 190 countries, many of them totally unable to support themselves financially or protect themselves. We have countries with no military, really, relying entirely on the threat of force from other bigger countries. We have countries whose their economies depend fundamentally on foreign aid and humanitarian services for the most basic things. They wouldn't be able to feed themselves without it. You have countries like, just as one example, South Sudan, which relies on us for food, healthcare, basic government programs and services. This is very common. And here's my point. All of those kinds of countries, the ones that can't support or defend themselves, still exist entirely through force. It's just that the threat of force is from their benefactors. In the year 1700, you'd have the same kind of scenario, except that we would have called it an empire, and the fake country wouldn't exist. It would be a property of the empire. Well, it's the same thing right now. We've built this fiction, this phantom of these fake countries that can't exist on their own, don't really exist at all, are totally helpless, cannot govern themselves, cannot defend themselves. And then we start talking about right to exist. Like, does South Sudan have a right to exist? Does it? It doesn't already. It already doesn't exist. It's not a real country. Does Somalia have a right to exist? How can it have a right to exist when it can't exist on its own? If your country cannot exist on its own, then it has no right to exist. I don't know how else to put it. Have you looked at your credit card statement lately? Well, it's actually unbelievable. You're working 40, 50 hours a week just to buy groceries and gas, things you used to be able to afford, and the banks are charging you over 20% interest for the privilege. Well, think about that, over 20%. It's designed to keep you underwater, but you don't have to play their game. American Financing is doing something the big banks hate. They're actually helping people. Right now, they have mortgage rates in the 5s. They're showing homeowners how to take their hard-earned equity to wipe out that high-interest debt. The average savings about $800 a month. Imagine what you could do with an extra $800 a month. It takes 10 minutes to talk to a salary-based mortgage consultant. No upfront fees, no obligation, to see how much you could save. And if you start today, you could delay 2 mortgage payments. That's immediate cash in your pocket when you need it most. Give American Financing a call. America's home for home loans, 866-569-4711. That's 866-569-4711. Or visit americanfinancing.net/Walsh. So that's why I say that no nation has a right to exist. A nation, which doesn't mean that no nation should exist. It just means that no nation has a right to exist. A nation exists if it forces its existence and continues to force its existence onto the globe. Or else the nation is a vassal, it is a subject of another nation. Even if we still call it a nation. So do I apply that logic to Israel? Yeah, I apply it to every country on the planet, including our own. And I'll tell you something else. Again, in that dystopian future, if China invades and we're about to be conquered, I'm not going to be sitting there saying, we have a right to exist. This isn't fair. If we can't defend ourselves, then we don't. I mean, you can cry about your rights all you want, but to who are you crying to? Who are you crying to? Who are you appealing to? Who, where are you claiming this right against? Who are you claiming it against? Well, you want a country, you better be able to defend it. Can't defend it, then it doesn't exist. That's it. And that's the, I'm kind of boring in that way. Maybe you've noticed. I have these really kind of simple ways of looking at things, and I just apply them to everybody consistently. That's my deal. That's my thing. That's my thing with Israel. That's why I don't fall into either camp, because it's just like any other country. I have a way of looking at things. I apply it to every country. Same for Israel. It's no different. That's it.